Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of My Little Black Book, the daily podcast where I talk into a mic and you listen for some reason. All right, let's talk about the comics. So, I want to Riyadh comedy lineup. Yeah. Um, Recently, a bunch of fucking comics were announced to basically go to Riyadh for a comedy festival. For context, this is a by Saudi Arabia. The petrol slave state. Like a reminder that Saudi Arabia is a autocratic hell state that is evil. Like I have no problem saying that in my at all. There are some comics on here that like I'm genuinely sad about, and for a lot of different reasons, and others that completely make sense. Uh, including and this includes people like Tim Dillon. Not Tim Dillon. Fuck Tim Dillon. I was thinking I was going to talk about Tim Dillon's reaction to people being mad at him for taking the money. No, I meant Bill Burr. Bill Burr was like upset. Gabriel Iglesias a little less so. This is not the first time he's taken Saudi money and done a show. He's talked about it in his specials, but Bill Burr particularly sucks because as of recently, he's been sort of a person of like principles and values, and it's been generally a pretty good, person who has, said the proper right things and called out the right people. But, I think this comedy festival is kind of, for a lot of people, the end of the, you know, into like the philosopher comedian. I think that's for some. I think for most people, uh, Trump's gonna do some dumb shit in like 5 days, and people are gonna forget about this. Like it's gonna it's like October the 9th will come, and people just like, and then people like will be on them releasing, like, showing the actual aliens at Area 51 to like avoid dropping the Epstein files or some shit. But like you have comics here that you would expect, your WHOREs. Rather, you have your Andrew Schultz, you have your Kevin Hart, you have your Dave Chappelle, your Tom Segura's. The one that is like kind of odd to me is Pete Davidson, because his dad was killed in 9/11, and he used that fact quite a lot to like as a cudgel when needed in pretty funny and good ways. And when asked on a podcast why he did it, he basically said it was a fucking lot of money. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me, dude? Like I like I feel like I don't have a price for my morals. I do think, though, if I'm being honest, I also am a broke son of a bitch, so it's not like I really have the, high ground to stand on with that. That being said, though, there are comics here that I'm not surprised. Fucking Russell Peters is on here. Um, uh, Chris Tucker is an odd one, but like God knows he needs a job. Brandon Carr doesn't, that makes sense. Aziz Ansari, he needs a job. That doesn't make that makes perfect sense. Louis C.K. like, yeah, that makes sense. I just, feel, you know by and large that this era, like for the last starting in like the second half of Obama's presidency, there was a time period where these comics, especially with Netflix specials, kind of like being a teenager who watched a lot of Netflix specials growing up. There's this era of like comics being these sort of truth tellers in the face of, bullshit. And and unfortunately, in especially during the early days of it, I even myself loved Joe Rogan and the rest of the podcast sphere. But once we get like about halfway through the Trump administration, all of these comics grab like they put their finger in their mouth, stick it up, start testing the wind and seeing where it's blowing. And while you know the average American doesn't necessarily or really doesn't support what the fuck is going on presently at the national level, there was plenty of money and attention to be begotten from doing this slide to the right. And you have to remember that, like, these guys don't actually have principles. They don't have principles. They just don't. They're comics. They're showmen. They are whores for eyeballs and attention, like every other entertainer out there. This is not surprising, and it shouldn't be treated as such by any of us. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, the comedy scene is kind of something that I don't really enjoy anymore, primarily for that grift, for that lack of integrity. Now they're entertainers, they're YouTube people. I obviously there is a certain level of emotional investment that I should hold at arm's length for that reason. Excuse me. But that being said, we are still living in an environment that is objectively hell. And when it comes to, the current environment of like the political nature, I don't think that this era of the philosopher comedian really exists anymore. Like these people have shown themselves time and time again as what they really are, and that is just they care about the money. I don't blame them for doing so. I get it. Like I'm here struggling trying to get my shit together too. I get it. But like, at the end of the day, if your dad was killed in 9/11 and there was a number that that made you okay with performing for Saudi Arabia, like that just tells me everything I need to know about you, and it's unfortunate. Regardless, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this episode of My Little Black Book. That's another chapter closed. I have been your host, Evan from HIMediaTV, and I'm going to send you to end of episode Evan. Have a lovely rest of your day.